Hi, I'm Ben, and this is my Woodland Mill 722 hand-powered sawmill. I wanted to do a review. There's a lot of people out there asking questions about it and wanting to know, what I thought of it. And I've had the sawmill now since September. It's now May. I've probably cut about 200 logs, maybe a little more with this saw, and it cuts just as good now as the day I unboxed it. So I would give this saw about a 9 out of 10 for a review. I mean, I would think that the only negative point that I have on this saw, when you first unbox the saw and put it together, there's a clip here, and I don't know if you can see this, I'll get a close-up of it later, but the cable comes down for your raising and your lowering of the saw, and it attaches to a clip here on the top of the saw. And what I found is every time I cut, it loosened up, and I was bending this piece here, and it was actually putting my saw off of straight. So what I ended up doing was eventually it opened up and it stretched the piece out, and I couldn't close it, put it back together. So I went down to the hardware store and I bought a heavier duty one, and I took the bolt that it's mounted to out, cut it off, and welded this one on, and I haven't had a problem since. So I would say that's kind of the weak link of the saw. If you have a problem with that, I would recommend going to a bigger one, and then that seemed to solve all my issues there. The only other negative point to the sawmill that I have is it seems as I'm cutting, the saw seems to want to drift. The crank that lowers and raises it, it doesn't have any kind of a real brake on it or anything that really stops it from drifting. So as I'm cutting through the log, the saw wants to kind of drift down. So what I find myself doing is while I'm cutting, I put my hand up here and hold on to the handle to keep it from moving up or down. And at first I put this off to say maybe the saw blade was dulling, and that's why the saw blade wanted to go higher or lower. But I found even with a brand new saw blade, it just seems to want to drift. So like I said, I just put my hand up here and hold on to it, and it seems to solve that problem. So eventually maybe I'll modify this a little bit and make it so that it has some sort of a brake on it, so that when I stop adjusting it up or down, it holds solid to where it's at. But those are the only two negative things that I have to say about the saw. I bought 10 blades with the saw when I started, and I've gone through all 10 blades, and I've sharpened them all, and I've gone through them again, and sharpened them and gone through them again. And I haven't had any problems. The bearings that guide the blade, I haven't had to change them, haven't had to change the guides, haven't had to change a belt or a pulley or any of that. I haven't had any issues with any of that stuff. I change the blade pretty regularly as I go through. The saw has guards open up, and you can see the saw blade here. The saw blade has just a handle here. You loosen this handle up, give it a spin, and what I do is I just push in on the handle, and that pushes this pulley over, and then the saw blade comes off, and all you gotta do is you line the saw blade up with the guides. Saw blade goes on. And what I find best to do, and I'm sure there's other ways of doing this, but what I find best is I just put my finger in behind the wheel, and I line the back side of the blade up with the back side of the wheel. And I have this where I've got it adjusted now to where all I need to do is just tighten down on this. And when it gets close, it kind of pops there a little bit, but I just find that I tighten this by hand. Tighten this right down. There's no movement in the saw blade at all. But original belt, the clutch works good. The blade, there's no complaints there. All that works really well. I haven't had any issues or any problems with any of that. Now this piece here on the saw, this piece is supposed to be for when you're cutting. There's posts here. Let's see if I can show you. The posts come up and down through holes in the carriage here, and this post is made so that when the saw comes down, if you leave your post up and you don't see it on the other side of your log, you don't hit that post with the blade. And what I found is I cut logs that are so large that I need every little bit of room that I can possibly get there, so I've moved that out of the way. And the same with the oiler, not oiler, but the lube. Water and Dawn dish soap is what I use for a lube. I put the tube towards the inside instead of towards the outside because I need every little bit of room. I actually rub the inside of the saw when I cut the larger logs that I've been cutting. And that's basically all there is to this side of the saw. When I first bought the saw, I had opened it up and I put it out in the yard and I'd set it on some cinder blocks. And I thought the cinder blocks should be close enough to level where it shouldn't be a problem. Well, the saw needs to be on a perfectly level surface. If you don't have it square and level, you're not going to cut your board square and level. So what I found was I adjusted the cinder blocks and got them pretty close to level, and I'd used that for a while. But what I found I was doing, I load and unload the saw with a skid loader. So when I picked the logs up and set the logs on, it's kind of a lightweight machine, so the logs were actually bouncing up and down on it, and it would bounce it across and it would fall off the cinder blocks. So I found the cinder blocks weren't really that great of an idea after picking the saw up and having to re-level it and set it back down again. I ended up building this wood frame here and made this wood platform. It's just a couple of 4x4 posts that I sunk in the ground and then put some wood planks across the top of it. So to make it perfectly level, what I ended up doing was I added feet to this. Now these don't come with the saw, but you can probably get them online, hardware store. It's just a foot with a piece of threaded rod, and I just drilled a hole up through the top and put the threaded rod up through there. There's a jam nut underneath, so you can adjust it up and down and lock it into where it needs to be. Now I put 8 of these in here. The track comes in a 6'5" piece, so overall there's 2 pieces here that come together about halfway down the saw here. There's a splice point here. So when you unbox this and it comes out of the box, I'll put my tape measure here. That's the start of this half of it. Come down here to the end is right about 6'5". Okay, so there's 2 of these tracks. So overall, the whole saw is 12'10". Okay, now there's a little bit extra because the end stops come past the end of the saw just a little bit there. So from one end to the other, I'll put my tape measure in here on the end of this piece of track here, all the way down to this end of the track is about 12'10" if I have it right down there. So that's about the overall length of this thing coming straight out of the box from the factory. Now, I found that 10 foot is probably about as long as I'll ever use, and 10 foot is from about when this is all the way back from the end of the blade, and when you run the saw all the way forward, the end of the track stops at the end of these wheels. These wheels ride on the track to ride back and forth, the carriage rides. So when it hits that stop, the stop is here and your blade is back there, so you're actually running about 10 foot of usable track is what you actually have to cut with. And 10 foot is right on the button. So I found that unless you set your log up with your log almost touching the blade to start with, you have a hard time cutting a 10-foot log. So usually what I cut mine down to about 9'10", and that gives me just a little bit of play here on the end so that I can cut them, and I don't have any real issues there. So 10-foot logs about as long as you can cut, and I found that if you go and measure this, when you take and run this saw all the way up in the air, and you come down here, now the log sits on these guides that come down through here. So if I put my saw blade right over top of one of these guides where the log is going to sit on, the log sits on here. So you come up, your maximum blade height is 20 inches. And I think that's why they say a 22-inch log, because you don't usually want to cut more than 2 inches off the top of your log. But if you look, you actually could get a 26-inch log in there without hitting the top of the saw. So your throat from your blade to the top of your saw is 6 inches. So that means you can cut no more than 6 inches off a log. So you can't cut an 8x8 beam because you don't have the room to put it through your saw. You can cut just barely a 6x6 beam, but nothing bigger than that. But what I was getting at here was the overall max of your log height is actually 26 inches. Now the problem comes in when you're cutting the width of your log. The width from blade guide to blade guide here, when you're talking on the inside here, it's actually from the inside of this post to the inside of the post on the other side is about 19 inches. So your throat of your saw is only 19 inches. So that's really the max you can cut on this, is a 19-inch board. And that is tough because you're rubbing one side or the other and installing the saw out on it. So I find that probably the best you're going to really get is about an 18-inch wide board out of this. Now, you can get between the posts, when you're running your carriage up and down, is about 27.5. So I found I can squeeze about a 26-inch round log through the saw. But if you do, your first cut, you're cutting that top 6 inches off. And then when you spin it, you're going to cut another 6 inches off. So you're going to end up with like a 20 by 20. And then you're going to spin it, and you're going to take another slice and another slice. And you're going to be down to about your 18, 19 inches. That'll be your throat there. So really the biggest board you're going to get is about 18.5 inches. And the biggest log you can really fit through here, I'm saying, is a 26, even though they claim 22. But I find that you're not going to move a 26-inch log by hand with yourself with a cant hook. You can do it if you have a piece of machinery. I'm lucky enough I have a skid steer where I can load and unload this machinery with a set of forks on a skid loader, and I can just put it on and off of there, and it's really not a problem for me. I find it's even hard to spin a 26-inch oak log. That's something that I can't even get to spin. Once you cut that flat off and you go to spin it, it's just one of those things where it's tough to do. Now, just to give you an overview of the saw here a little bit, I apologize about it being kind of dark. I'm underneath the roof here, and with the sun coming out on the outside, it wants to look kind of dark in here. Now, this is a Woodland Mills 722 cooler 7-horse motor. And this handle here is just for the blade adjustment. I showed you how when you loosen that, the blade comes off. This piece here is actually the end of that shaft for the pulley. So to make this square and true, when you're doing your tracking, you can adjust this and bring it in and out, and then tighten your outside up to get your tracking of your blade right. And I have this pretty well locked in where I want it now, so I don't have any issue there. Now, the height on this, when you're cutting this and you're adjusting here, there's a piece of plastic here that's bolted on that has a line that you can adjust on this. And this here is just a piece of magnet tape. It's just a magnet with a piece of a tape measure on the other side, so you can tell what your length is. And they have it set different sizes here, so if you want to cut 2-inch boards, you're cutting 10 to 9. This is a 2-inch side, and it says right on there, somewhere here, yeah, 2-inch and 1-inch. So if you want to cut a 2-inch board on this side, these are 2-inch boards. There's one 2-inch board, and you're cutting inch boards, you're cutting on this side, so you can adjust this down. And you're saying, okay, I just made a cut at 21, so I want to make another 1-inch board. I'll bring this down to 20, and then cut another board, and bring it down to 19, cut my next board. And it works pretty well. And it comes with 2 of these. There's one white one, and then the spare one's on top of the saw here, the yellow one here. And this one's marked inch and 4/4, so that's the 1-inch boards there too. And I find that the 4/4 is actually a 1-inch board minus your blade cut. So this is an actual inch on this side, and this is an inch plus the blade kerf on that side. Now, I bumped this with the skid loader and I broke this weld. I don't blame that on Woodland Mills. That's not their fault. That was my fault on that one. Now, this is your tank here where you add your coolant for your blade. And all I do is I take a bottle of dish soap, Dawn dish soap, and I just take and I put a squirt of that in there, and then I fill the rest up with water and I shake it up. There's an adjustment knob here where you can adjust this, turn this in or out to set how much flow you want to come down through here. And then when the tube comes around, comes down here to the shutoff here, on and off, and that just shuts your flow off. Your tube comes down through, and there's extra tube here for your adjustment when you raise and lower it. And it comes through here. There's a bolt here that anchors to this piece of tubing that comes on the other side. The copper tubing goes into this plastic tube, and that's your adjustment for your loop. So you want to bring it in or out, and you just kind of snug the bolt down on it, and that holds it in place so that your lube goes down on your blade. This back handle, this handle carriage here, just slides down in, and there's two anchor points here. There's one here, and there's one over here. I took the handle out of this side because I was cutting such a big log that that handle was actually hindering me. If you look down through there, when I was putting a log that would almost brush those posts, it would actually catch on the end of that handle. So I took that handle out of that side. And all that is a threaded handle that you can adjust in or out. And it just holds this post here, so you can raise and lower this post. And this is just a handle. This is your throttle here. You hold down on your throttle while you're running the log through, and you let up on it. There's a clutch in there, similar to a go-kart. You know, when the high RPMs, it engages the clutch and it kicks it in and spins your blade, and when you let off the handle, lower RPM, the clutch disengages and your blade stops spinning. And all that has is just a cable here, runs around and goes up to the back side there for the throttle for the motor. The motor's simple. There's just a choke on and off, and on and off, and that's all there is to it. Turn it on, give it a pull. I don't even use the choke. Turn it off. Nothing really to it. Now it starts first pull, and I've been running it for months now. That's really all there is to the saw. There's this tube over here on this side has all your instruction operating manuals inside of it. It's just a weatherproof container. I like this little thing. This is a nice little touch they put on here, so I don't have to worry about going looking for the manual. You know how everybody is. You have a manual for something, and you put it in a drawer somewhere, and you lose it and forget it, and you don't know where it's at. You need to order parts, or you want to look at, you know, some part of the operation manual. So I like the fact that they added that on there. That's my review on my Woodland Mills 722. If you have any comments, feel free to leave them in the section below, and I'll do my best to try to get back to you.